Tonight's event is chaired by Miranda Krestovnikoff, who is a biologist, trained diver, and the resident wildlife expert on BBC One's The One Show. She's presented natural history stories ranging from robotic ants to rare dolphins, and was one of the original members of the Coast team exploring Great Britain's shoreline and revealing fascinating tales of marine life. She regularly writes articles on tourism and leisure for national newspapers and magazines, and is the author of 4 books: Miranda's Best British Beaches, Scuba Diving, and her most recent titles, The Sea and Birds, which were both written for children. So without further ado, I will hand over to Miranda and the panel. Thank you very much.
Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope you've had a chance to look around the exhibition Animals, Art, Science and Sound. And we're just taking some flavours of that this evening to delve into the underwater world with our panel of marine experts to explore the wonders of life beneath the waves. So if you have had a look around the exhibition, you will be, I've just looked around it this afternoon, and it's absolutely astonishing, some of the artefacts there. They've got more than 100 artworks, manuscripts, sound recordings, beautiful illustrations and books, many of which are on display for the very first time. They've got a little bit of ancient Greek papyrus, which details the mating habits of dogs. They've got some of the earliest photographs of Antarctic animals. They've got a recording of the very last Ko-Wai'o songbird of Hawaii just before it went extinct. And what this exhibition shows is that documenting the animal world has resulted in some of humankind's most awe-inspiring art and science and sound recordings. And it also highlights that it can take years and years of research to unlock the secrets of just a single species. They've got the first photograph of a live giant squid, which was only taken back in 2005. The winding path of animal discovery has led to some really quite amusing misunderstandings, such as the first scientific description of a duckbill platypus, which was thought to be so bizarre it surely must be a hoax. And there's also a 16th century drawing of a monkfish, which was done not firsthand, it was done on a description that somebody had written down, and it literally is the body of a monk covered in scales. That was your monkfish. Now more than ever, it's vital that we record animals both visibly and audibly. So we hope that you might get inspired to do the same, whether you're venturing far afield or simply stepping into your garden. Maybe you can get involved and play your part in this enduring journey of discovery. Anyway, so tonight we're focusing on the underwater world. That's definitely why I'm here. Brett said I'm a diver. I'm fascinated by all things marine, whether it's marvelling at the complexities of whale song, whether it's examining those little chromatophores, those colour-changing cells in the skin of the common cuttlefish. I've had really magical encounters with a whole host of marine wildlife, a lot of it just around the coast of the UK. Nest-building wrasse, curious solitary dolphins, fighting sea anemones. I love the discovery of being underwater, being in a really foreign environment, one that challenges us as air-breathing mammals. I'm sure our panel will feel the same about the wonders of the marine world. So, without further ado, I will introduce them. We have 3 giants of the marine world who are going to talk through with us their various projects and come together to reflect on some of maybe the mysteries and wonders of the seas. And as Brett says, at the end we'll have 20 or 30 minutes for some Q&A as well. So if you have any burning questions, just hang on to them and we'll get to you, hopefully, if we've got time at the end. So, first up, next to me, Tom. Tom Mustill is a biologist turned filmmaker and writer, specialising in stories where people and nature meet. Now, Tom's first book, which is How to Speak Whale, which I'm just about 5 or 6 chapters into at the moment, was published last year. Tom's worked with the gods like David Attenborough, Greta Thunberg, Stephen Fry, if you can describe him as a god. He's won over 30 international awards, has been nominated for a Primetime Emmy. He directed the blockbuster Inside Nature's Giants series, which won a BAFTA award, a Royal Television Society award and a Broadcast award, as well as the ZSL award for communicating zoology. Tom, welcome this evening. It's a long, isn't it? Yeah. So our second guest is Miranda Lowe. Miranda's principal curator and museum scientist at the Natural History Museum. She cares for a plethora of historically important specimens from both the Challenger and Discovery oceanic expeditions. Miranda's scientific expertise is in pericarid crustacea. So if you think woodlice and sandhoppers, you're sort of on the right lines. So that includes crustaceans that live in marine, freshwater and terrestrial habitats. Miranda's presented lectures on curatorial research and popular science. She's appeared on shows such as the BBC Radio 4 series Natural Histories. And in 2013, she was a finalist for the National Diversity Awards, receiving a Certificate of Excellence for her achievements. This is also the first time I've ever introduced somebody with the same name as me. So, Miranda, welcome. Our third panellist is David Kernick. He's a research fellow at the Institute of Zoological Society of London, and he's head of the Ocean Predator Laboratory. David holds a PhD in marine ecology from University College London. He's got 14 years of experience in the field of marine conservation science and has published over 30 scientific papers, one of which is being drafted and redrafted at the moment. Well, I think you'll come on to that later, won't you? David's currently an associate editor at the Journal of Remote Sensing in Ecology and Conservation. He's on the management board for the Centre for Doctoral Training on Sustainable Management of UK Marine Resources and is marine lead on the Biome Health Project. So, David, thank you very much for joining us. So, without further ado, we will kick off and focusing on each speaker's work. So, if any of you have been following UK marine sites on social media, you might have seen a small, quite a small number of small-tooth sand tiger sharks stranding on UK and Irish coastlines. I think we've had 3 so far. We're just waiting for the next one to turn up. Now, the sight of a shark in British waters is always causing a stir in the tabloids, but small-tooth sand tiger sharks are a new species to our coastline. And apart from generating these sensational headlines, the more serious side of the story is that it could be an indication of climate change, pushing them a bit further north. So, David, you are currently researching this, and would you please just tell us a little bit more about what's going on and what might be happening?
Absolutely, no problem. So thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. As Miranda says, you may have seen about this in the news or on social media, but I'll go back. I was working on Ascension Island on a separate project, on another shark-related project, when I got a message from a friend one Saturday saying, "This just washed up on our beach. Do you know what it is?" And we looked at it and just thought, I have a good idea what it is, but why is it here? And this was back mid-March on Lep by Southampton. And what it was one of these small-tooth sand tiger sharks. As Miranda mentioned, this is a species we haven't documented in the UK before. So why are they in the UK? And since mid-March, I have gone from knowing very little about this animal to reading all about 12 papers that exist upon it. It's a very poorly understood animal, and we're currently trying to unpick and unravel why this animal is here. So I thought today I'd just give you an update. It's not going to be a conclusive result, but an update on where we are at and what the investigation entails thus far. So if we look at the IUCN distribution, an incredibly patchy distribution because there's so few records of the animal. But this is what the IUCN understands to be the distribution. Now, a couple of things of note here. You'll see that the most northern extent is just off the coast of France. That is an unconfirmed report off of Normandy, which pulled it all the way up there. Before that, it was actually a bit further down Portugal, the actual confirmed range. And in the last few years, there's been an absolute explosion of new records of this species that have popped up, and most of these have filled in the gaps, whether it's in Ascension Island, whether it's in Venezuela, the Sargasso Sea. Incredibly unusual to have a large animal like this all of a sudden just pop up out of nowhere. So it was already a bit of an interesting species and on the watch list as to what was happening. And as I say, this was the most northerly extent of the species range that we knew of. Nothing around the UK until middle of March. So 19th of March, we got a phone call to say that this large-bodied animal had washed up on the shore. There was actually a video emerged the day before of it thrashing in the shallows, and a rather brave lady was trying to refloat it, to her credit, to be fair to her. Unfortunately, like a lot of these cases, it was unsuccessful and stranded later the next day. This was a 2.75 metre female. Now, bear in mind that this is a deep water species. They grow up to about 5 metres in length. Females are supposed to mature, off of the very limited data we have, at about 4.5 metres, 4 to 4.5 metres. So this is likely an immature female. And anyway, so this was really exciting for us. We were like, wow, this is cool. We're going to write this up straight away. Everyone wants to know about this. So we drafted a paper, got it all ready, circulated it to co-authors. It's ready to go, ready to submission. I get a phone call from a colleague, Nick Payne, in the University College Dublin, saying, Dave, you never guess what we found. We found a small tooth sand tiger shark too. It's more northerly than yours, it's bigger than yours, and we've got all of it, because unlike the one in Southampton, we lost the head and the tail because some other people got there first and took the samples before we could. So I had a conversation with Nick and we decided, right, well, they're both females. This one, 4.5 metres, was mature. Looked through the literature, there's some evidence that females move up into shallow water to pup. So we thought, well, maybe these females, the small ones following the large one, they do sexually segregate, and this female potentially has dropped pups up in the Irish Sea and has just got lost. So that was the working hypothesis at that point. We again drafted that paper. And then I live in Devon, closer to my home, I got a phone call saying there's another one, and this one's just down the road from you. It was James and Barry found this individual floating out in Lyme Bay on the 31st of March. Sorry, that was a March day, is the 31st, or the 30th of April, should I say. And they had it in the back of the van. Barry is a commercial fisherman. He fishes for Dover Sole. He was out fishing and saw a body that he thought was a human. In some respects, he was glad it wasn't, but floating just below the surface. And interestingly, he was worried about bringing it in, because if that was a poor beagle and he brought it in, he'd get a large fine, even though it's dead, and potentially lose his license. So there's a bit of a data reporting issue there. But he brought it in nonetheless and kind of subtly called around. He hid it apparently under a tarp in the Cobb at Lyme Regis, if you know about it, because he didn't want the authorities to see that he brought in a shark until he knew exactly what it was. So he called us and we went down and checked it. And he kept that in his refrigerated van on his driveway for 3 days until we could go and retrieve it to do a post-mortem on it. This one was a 3 metre male though, which completely turned the records upside down, and we were like, okay, so it's not necessarily females aggregating coming to shallow water. Where are we at now? And this is roughly where we're at. And we really are scratching at the surface as to what has driven this sudden influx of these large sharks. Now, while they are completely harmless to humans, the presence of a large-bodied animal like this does require some proactive management. We saw what the headlines ran with, and it's not too far a leap to go from this animal to maybe something that maybe is a little bit more of a challenge to manage. So this is the occurrences now, and so we have 3 new records, which we believe extends the northerly range of these animals. And as you can see there, the North Sea and the English Channel and the Irish Sea, incredibly shallow. Why is a deep water species that's normally around 800 metres all of a sudden coming up into this shallow 30 to 60 metre English Channel? So as part of the Ocean Predator Lab and with collaborations with like University College Dublin and Plymouth University, we've got a number of tools that we use to try and investigate the movement and behaviour of predators around the world, whether that's using eDNA, fisheries data is vital, tagging and bioacoustics. So we delved into those and we're like, what are we going to apply here? And the first one was standard necropsy. Similar to the documentary that Tom led on the giants, we did a necropsy on this shark. This was the one from LEP. You can see the head's been taken. a lot of it had been taken of the organs on the inside, so there wasn't too much we could do. But for all 3 individuals, there were no key external physical injuries. So we don't think it was a fishery interaction, all of a sudden dumping carcasses on their way through the English Channel and washing them up. Interestingly, in no individual was there evidence of recent feeding, which suggests in this species that they've recently migrated and possibly exhibiting during a reproductive phase. We are also exploring whether these are linked genetically. There is some evidence in some sharks that there are familial linkages in social groups. That is pending. And other results are also pending, such as histology and pathology. Now, you may also recall in later last year, a Greenland shark popped up in Cornwall. That individual was behaving very erratically at the surface. Turns out that individual had meningitis, which was the first case of that of meningitis in a large shark such as that. It's a lot harder with this one because we don't have the head, so we can't work out whether it's meningitis. But with the other 2, we're exploring that to see whether there was some underlying disease that was inhibiting the cognitive function of these animals. But just today, we kind of looked to the skies and drawn on our satellite data. And one of the key things that's happened last summer and over winter was we had a sea surface temperature anomaly, particularly at the bottom temperature, at the bottom of the seabed around the North Sea. Last summer, the English Channel and the Southern Irish Sea was about 4 degrees higher than average. And that persisted through the winter and also into January, February, March, about 1 to 2 degrees above average. What we believe is our current hypothesis is these animals, which are normally in the warmer waters off of Portugal and round into the Mediterranean, have followed a warm water plume up onto that shallow shelf. They have all of a sudden realised that there's not much food around for them because their natural prey is not abundant in that area. And so they've essentially wasted away. And we're waiting for that, the analysis, particularly of the liver, to work out whether that is actually true in this case. So this is the anomaly for January. So you can see the warm water coming up onto that coastal shelf and coming up into the channel. And we think this is actually what, if we followed this through into March, we think this is actually what's brought them up. But 3 random incidences in themselves is interesting, but doesn't provide us much information about how they're distributed, how they're using our waters. So one thing we are contemplating or trying to get off the ground is to run what is known as an environmental DNA survey. So all animals shed DNA into their environment, and we can go and take water samples and extract the very fine fragments of DNA that are left within that and filter all of the water out and just get left with the DNA material and understand what animals have interacted with that body of water over the last roughly 3 days. And we've done this recently for great white sharks in the Mediterranean, where the population is very, very low and incredibly hard and cryptic to study. And in one of the last kind of hotspots, we do get positive hits of great white sharks in the Sicilian Channel. And we'd like to use this technology and apply it, particularly around that Southern Irish Sea, English Channel area, to kind of unpick whether this is a one-off or whether this has been a species that has been inhabiting that area for a while and these are just freak coincidences or occurrences where they've stranded at the same time. And if you get really fancy with your eDNA particles, you can use hydrodynamics of the system and hindcast back where that water column came from and try and work out roughly where that animal was 3 days before. And also, a lot of the work we do in the Ocean Predator Lab is a lot of acoustic and satellite tagging. So I have aspirations to go down to that continental shelf and hopefully tag, if we can encounter some tan tiger sharks, but also poor beagles, 6-gill sharks that we also have along that shelf, and maybe deploy some of these deep water baited remote cameras to try and get some documented evidence of them in their environment. And this is the feature we would like, with collaboration with the University College Dublin, to explore up the UK continental shelf and into Ireland. And that's the plans for the future, to try and unpick this story a bit further. So yeah, with that, that's where we're at the moment. Watch this space. If another small-tooth sand tiger shark turns up soon, then I'm not redrafting the paper again.
Thank you. Do you think with the warm water anomalies that you're talking about that we might have any other species like this appearing or even disappearing from our waters?
I think it's very likely that we're going to get other species popping up. You know,
What should we look for?
Well, it feels like they're coming from both directions at the moment, because we have walruses and belugas coming from the north. We have, sand tigers coming from the south. There is there's a number of species that we often see very rarely in the UK, like makos will occasionally pop up. We might start to see those a bit more regularly. Now, the press always jump on white sharks and whether white sharks are going to turn up. A story from the Canadian side of the Atlantic. Roll back 10, 15 years, white sharks in Atlantic Canada were never seen. And if you went there today, talking to colleagues like Nigel Hussey at University of Windsor, they're everywhere. That's because the population off of the American seaboard is blooming. They're moving up, they're expanding. On our side of it, the Mediterranean population is on its knees. There isn't the surplus population there. Do I believe that white sharks have been in UK waters before? Yes. But they probably just clipped around Scilly and then gone off on their way and back down again. We also need to bear in mind that this is one of the busiest shipping and fishing lanes in the world, and there's eyes out there all the time. What is concerning is talking to fishers about their reluctance to report large sharks and bring them in, and that the potential impact that could have on data provision for us. I think there's a bit of work that needs to be done there on the regulatory standpoint with the MMO, the Marine Management Organisation, etc., to kind of make sure that we do have this surveillance network in place and that there is the ability for those data to be reported, so that we can act fast if something like that happens.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's absolutely fascinating. Miranda, right, we're going to come on to you next. Please, could you share some of your work that you've been doing with crustacea at the Natural History Museum?
Here we go. So that's what my lab looks like. And although there is some colour around those specimens that I'm pulling out, those lobsters that I'm pulling out of jars, my world is kind of a bit more black and white to David's and Tom's. I would consider more technicolor, because I work with predominantly dead historical materials, so historical collections that were collected by the Victorians. So our earliest crustacean or crab collections are from the, I would say, the 1830s, around there, upwards. So I wear two hats. So I look after this historical material. That's why I'm called a principal curator. But as a museum scientist, originally my scientific work is around pericarids, as the other Miranda said, but tiny shrimpy things called amphipods, which are really important. Well, I believe a lot of tiny things in the ocean, microscopical things, are really important, not only to sustaining life, such as whales, so krill are a food source for whales, but also in terms of measuring the ocean health and water quality of rivers and so forth as well. So amphipods are really important in terms of their body size, so they can be less than a millimetre, smaller, and comparative to their body size, they can utilise and use heavy metals, which are dangerous to us humans and getting into our water systems, so heavy metals such as cadmium, lead, and so forth. So I've done a lot of work around that in my early days at the museum. Not so much now. So now I am more of an advocate for the use of historical collections, and to use that historical data and specimens, because we've got, huge timelines of environmental data that I verify, validate, make sure that the specimens still exist in terms of the notebooks and published data there, and put that all out, make it all more accessible to conservationists, environmental scientists. So, but this picture is just showing what my lab looks like. And if you're wondering what's all that, the glass jars that are in red, So that the material in those glass jars painted red are type specimens. We call them type specimens, and they are the name-bearing species. So they are the first of anything found anywhere in the world in that jar. And so the museum has a lot of type specimens that international scientists from all over the world that come and compare whatever they are finding or researching to those in terms of whether they're new species or not, or a new distribution or a range of the animals themselves. So that's me there. My slides are just going to show you, because I'm very much working on multiple projects at any one time in terms of the collections that I'm responsible for, and how I work with scientists all over the world, and in particular those that are in universities. So I'm making a huge assumption, but you all will know this bearded man on the side there, this is Charles Darwin. What you're looking at is part of a collection that he studied, as the title says, in the 1840s. And interestingly, since then, that collection of barnacles that he studied has not been documented in a way that's accessible to more people, so electronically. So we're spending a lot of time digitizing, so imaging specimens, the overall features, the finer details and so forth, and the actual documents themselves that Charles Darwin would have used to classify barnacles. He was totally obsessed in the 1840s, worked for 8 years obsessively on barnacles. And the work that I'm doing, so this is one drawer out of 3 cabinets of whole specimens, and I'm working on looking at the range of material that he worked with. So he only collected 1 barnacle in his life on the Beagle voyage in the 1830s. This barnacle collection was collected by multiple people across the world. Some of the naturalists were actually collecting other things like birds and so forth, but actually collected barnacles for him. And this collection would have been at the British Museum at that point in time. But the work that I'm doing, I'm cross-referencing with his 2 volumes about recent barnacles, and validating the geographic references, locations where this material was sourced, and also proving and also verifying that the specimens still exist within the collection. But the important thing about some of our barnacle studies, they can be considered invasive species across the world, and they're really important economically in terms of commercial shipping. And, you know, we mustn't have barnacles sticking to the undersides of ships or boats, because that then causes extreme drag, and then you're using more fuel to transport the goods as well. But they are very resilient creatures, as you know, if you see them when you're rock pooling or along the coast, on the piers and so forth. So you can get various forms, encrusting ones, but the ones you can see here, I've pictured, taken a picture of the more glamorous ones of barnacles. So these are stalked barnacles there that Darwin himself would have prepared and dissected there. He also discovered that barnacles are upside down shrimp. So the external features of a shrimp, he uses reference to a lucifer species of shrimp that within the barnacles themselves. So you can see what looks like some heads, the stalk, and then you've got a head, and then you've got these frilly bits. So the filter feeding organs, those would be the swimmerets, so the swimming features within a shrimp. So a lot of reduced characters of a shrimp are inside the, let's say, the shell of a barnacle themselves there. And so we use a lot of this material to actually inform people about the world's oceans and put them into exhibitions. So we had an exhibition called Coral Reefs, Secret Cities Under the Sea. And within that, we were amplifying a lot of the work that people like David and Tom would be doing, and trying to tell people why they should care about coral reefs. Coral reefs are homes to many, many different animals. They are biodiversity hotspots, so that means where a number of species live amongst those corals. So it's really important why we as human beings and on the planet and across the world should consider and care and understand why these coral reefs are being affected, what species that specifically like to live on certain corals, certain reefs as well. And in terms of my area of research with crustaceans, we've got the cleaner shrimp. That is really important because they can clean on a diseased reef of a disease called white band disease. Comparative to the density of the population, they can help a reef to survive and not be so affected because they will keep the reef clean. So a lot of tiny animals living among the reef do that kind of job. But also the reefs are important for the adult fish to rear their young as well, and protection from predators. And the way that I work with researchers and the coral specimens, this is just one project that I've been working on with a PhD student from Australia, is revealing why certain reef structures exist. So as I said earlier on, we have, so in terms of some of this coral material, so what you're looking at here are some corals from the Chagos archipelago. That became a marine protected area, I think in, was it 2004, 5? I can't remember. 2010? Oh yes, because I remember Gordon Brown had just left office at that point. Yes, you're right. 2010. So where was I going with this? I completely forgot my train of thought about all of that. Oh yes, so they're from the Chagos archipelago, became a marine protected area in 2010. And at that point, 3 bulk lots of coral material collected from that area in on 3 expeditions in the 1970s, so we can no longer collect corals in such a large and massive way anymore because they are CITES listed and protected in terms of wildlife trade. But this series of more contemporary corals compared to the material that we have from the 1800s, but then became more important due to this marine protection, because one, you can no longer, it's a no-take zone, and 2 individuals that collected material at that point in time, Charles and Anne Shepherd, they then came back to look at those collections to classify, identify the material that they had collected at that point in time in the 1970s. But also, people were inquiring about the environmental data that we had linked to those specimens. And so, how can this material now be used in more modern technology, DNA sequencing? Also, we used a handheld 3D scanner by a company called Creaform that use their scanners in the aviation and motoring industry. So for us at the museum, it's the first time our material's been scanned in that way. So we've got a lot of this dry coral skeletal material at a large warehouse in South London, in Wandsworth. And that's where myself and the student laid out all of the same species, Acropora, the same genus of Acropora, across this warehouse that were collected at various points in time to actually look at the coral structure. We know that there are biases amongst scientists in terms of what they collect and how they collect, because a lot of the material that we have are clean skeletons, but there is also some material that is proving very interesting that still has the organic matter, the algae on there, and there are some scientists that want to do some research on that material too. But what I'm just saying to you that I'm more of an advocate of how the historical material can influence the conservation and marine protected areas policies today when we can no longer collect this material. and how we conserve the living. This is another project that I've been involved in and many other of my colleagues. So this is the Darwin Tree of Life, where again we're looking and we're collecting fresh material to sequence the data and have a DNA barcode for literally every species of animal across the UK. So, but what I'm showing here is on your left, my right. I have to remember this. So the red jar, Nephrops challengeri. So that is an animal that was collected and named from the Challenger expedition in the 1870s, 1872 to 1876. And that expedition, so the ship was called Challenger, but that expedition has been considered the birth of oceanographic science. It's when scientists went on board ship and went with questions such as how deep is the ocean to find that out, and actually collected a number of these specimens. And at that point in time, there were 4,500 species of animal new to science. There is still a lot more material that has never been looked at, so there's still work to discover new species within collections already. But so that's the type specimen. So as I said earlier, the very first of that species. And then the other one you can see there was collected fresh, and it's marked blue because, and what I should have said earlier on. So these two lots of specimens are preserved in alcohol, not the drinkable kind, I must say, but one is a better grade to preserve DNA than the other. So the original one is in about 70–80% industrial methylated spirits. It does keep the material flexible for dissection and research over time. But then this new collected one in 2022, it's now put into molecular grade alcohol. So it's a higher strength, which preserves the DNA better and for a longer period of time, so that scientists can still study. And as you can see as well, we're printing labels. So there's new tech involved in that, with the way that a printer will embed the Indian ink that we use, and so that doesn't bleed into the specimen. And also not only DNA barcoding the tissues of the specimen, but also barcoding number within the label, because historically, you can see up there it says 88.22, and that means 1888.22, but it's a whole batch of animals that were given the same number. So it's not a unique number, and so those are the challenges that we have now in terms of documenting our specimens online. We've got to barcode everything. And just lastly here, some of you that have been to the exhibition already would have seen the glass octopus there, and there's also a squid alongside it, but the image I have is of the octopus and two jellyfish, so the common moon jellyfish there, Aurelia aurita, and then, oh, my brain's gone now. I know what that is, Portuguese man-of-war, and the name is, pelagica. The name has escaped me, scientific name. But these are really amazing, well, they are documented in the museum records as specimens, but they're obviously very fine glass objects representing those animals, made by a father and son team called Leopold and Rudolf Blaschke. So the jellyfish were made in the 1870s and the octopus in 1883. Well, that's when the orders went in for those to be sent to the museum at that time. There are pockets of these models across the world in museums and universities. They went out of fashion and have come back into fashion again, but originally they were purchased as teaching models to show people at that time, those that couldn't go on board ship and explore or couldn't manage to visit the seaside. They were representatives of animals in true form and colour within museums, and were alongside the real specimens. So for instance, jellyfish don't look that great when they're presented in a jar, often slumped at the bottom, but there are techniques where you can hang the jellyfish with a bit of fishing line, fine line, within the hooks of a jar so that it present very well. But these were to show the colour and form and shape, and for students to learn from, which is really amazing. So you see the fragility of the glass. To think that students would have handled those, or they would have come out for lectures all the time. But what they do show is another way of looking and seeing things, is that just because they are made out of glass, which is fragile, but is also, in a way, showing how fragile the ocean is. You know, how we must care for the beauty and you know, the importance of having well-formed ecosystems there, with you know, the fragile nature of jellyfish susceptible to changes in climate and chemistry, as is all animals, that why they are really important. So I do urge you to go and visit the exhibition, and you can look up online about the Blaschka models if you're becoming a fan too. Right.
Fascinating, thank you. That's an amazing insight into your life as a curator. And those models are absolutely amazing. They're really, really tiny. You expect them to be a lot bigger. They're really, really small and very intricate. Thank you. So our final panellist, Tom Mustill, is going to talk about your acclaimed book, How to Speak Whale, and the journey that you've taken working with scientists to record the sounds of the oceans. Tom.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. It's a delight to be named a giant of the ocean. But
I didn't mean that physically. I mean,
no, I mean, I'll take it. I'll take it. But I can't take it because I'm going to show you some giants of the ocean, some whales. My background is, I started out as a conservation biologist and then became a wildlife filmmaker. I was very happily making wildlife films. And then I was on a holiday in Monterey Bay in California. And this happened to me and my friend. Oh, you might want to turn the volume up a little bit for this.
He knocked it over. He knocked it over, the kayak.
I can't believe you're laughing.
It's not funny. It's terrible.
So this is with my friend Charlotte. She's in the front of the kayak, and that's a humpback whale, an adult humpback whale, about 30 or 40 tons. And it whacked the nose of the kayak and sucked us underwater and hit it about 2 centimeters from Charlotte's foot. And we came up about 9 seconds later, and that's us looking very happy not to be dead. I'd lost my flip-flops, and will it pause it now, or will it just play on loop? Thank you, please, yeah. So that was a rather startling experience for me, obviously. After it had finished, I was very gratified to find that somebody had filmed it, because actually after the whale landed on us, it swam off and we were rescued and we paddled back to shore. And I told my friends, but I don't think they really believed me. There wasn't really any evidence. And then I went camping, and 2 days later I came back and it had gone viral on the internet. I had to phone my mum and say, like, there's this thing that's happened and I'm fine. But what really struck me afterwards was both how lucky we were to have survived, also quite lucky to have been jumped on by a whale, because whales breach quite rarely, and they don't tend to do it onto people. It happens sometimes with sailing boats. When humpback whales are aggressive, they use their tail fins and their big pectoral fins. It was not an aggressive act. So we think it's an accident. But what struck me was how unlikely it was that someone would have filmed it. And actually, 2 people filmed it, and somebody else took photographs of it as it happened. We were away from where the main humpback whales were at that day. We were paddling back to shore. But because somebody filmed it, it took what was an interaction between a human and a whale, and it became a data point that people could analyse. And some scientists looked at the arc of the whale as it was in the air, and they looked at its movement and its biodynamics and the mechanisms of its body, and they showed that it actually turned away in mid-flight. And that had really puzzled me, because the last thing I saw when it was above me was what I thought it was going to squash us, and then we were in the water and it hadn't. So they could see it turn, and they could say, oh, maybe it didn't want to land on top of you. And another thing that happened was that people used artificial intelligence to identify who the whale was, who its and that linked it in databases collected by citizen scientists, people just like you, going out on boats, looking at whales, taking photographs of them. And so we now know how old the whale is, where it was born, who its mother is, and all sorts of other information about it. And ever since it's happened, I've received updates automatically telling me every time it pops up and somebody sees it. And so it's quite a strange thing to happen, that a giant wild animal jumps on you in the sea, and then you find out who it is, and you get email updates about where it's been seen next. And I thought, as somebody who's quite into the ocean and stories that link us to the ocean, I wanted to see where this led and what that meant for everybody. Because I think what's happening here with my weird personal example is a very vivid example of something that's happening to all of us, which is that we're moving in biology from the study of bodies, which is what Miranda's just shown us, has been all we've ever been able to measure before are bodies and capture. Like, biology is the study of comparison. You have to be able to compare something and measure it to try and understand it. And behavior and communication have been unmeasurable until recently. But now we have, for the last, since the 1930s, we've had recorders that can record audio, and shortly afterwards we could record video, we could put them in waterproof housings, we could put them in the sea, we could take them around the world. And now everybody in this room has one probably in their pocket, and we can capture animal behavior and share it and compare it. And what that means is we can start to apply big statistical analysis techniques to understand what other animals are doing and saying, and answer questions like the one that I was asked, which is, what was that whale doing? Because despite the fact that these are some of the largest animals that have ever lived, and they're doing some of the most cool and dramatic things that any animal ever does, we have no idea why they breach. And we don't know why they do many of the other behaviors that they do. So, and I think, you can buy, for instance, now a bird feeder that automatically takes photographs of any bird that comes to it and identifies the species of bird. And the makers of that feeder are developing it so it will identify the individual bird. So soon, what happened with that whale, you will have in your back garden, and you'll know where it's migrated, who its relatives are. You can identify it by its song, and soon that will be able to work by identifying individuals by their voices, because each bird has a unique voice, just like each person. So biology is moving from being able to just tell you that it's a song thrush to saying it's Barry, and it's Edna's grandson, and he's come from Sierra Leone, or something like that. I don't know, that would be a nightingale, not a song thrush. But do you see what I mean? We're starting to, and that helps us to see animals as what they are, which is individuals, and that they're different. So that was, sorry, I should have shown you that. So that's me at the back running away in terror, and Charlotte at the front, and she's an accountant, she'd never seen a whale before, staring at it as it came down on us. And yeah, that's mainly to show what a legend Charlotte is. But this is the percentage of the world population that uses a smartphone. And so this happened in 2015 around here. And I guess we were in California, where probably most people had smartphones. So it would have been closer to there, most people out on the water. But I think if this had happened 10 years earlier, it would have just been a story. And not only would none of my friends have believed me, which would have been intensely frustrating, but I wouldn't have spent 5 years researching a book about it, which would have been, and my life has just been so fascinating because of this weird thing that happened to me. So this is the whale. We called them prime suspect, which now I regret because it seems mean, but at the time we thought it would be like a fun detective thing, like who is the whale? And a few months ago, I got a message from some scientists working in Mexico, and they were using a new AI tool that immediately, when you take a photograph of a whale, immediately identifies who it is. And just to put this in context, until like a couple of years ago, to identify a whale, you'd have to be somebody who spent all of your time looking at these books of their tail flukes, because each tail is unique. And you would take the photo and you'd print it out. At the end of your field season, you'd compare all the different photos and you'd put them in stacks, and you'd have a whole stack of ones and you didn't know who it was. these AI tools are better by far than any expert human at doing this. And they can do it instantly, and they can combine all of the whale databases around the world. And using them, almost every North Pacific humpback whale has now been identified. That's something that biologists just thought was a joke a few years ago. And that's been done by citizen science and AI. So I know you know a lot about AI from the news and how scary and like some of the elements of it are. And some of the elements of using AI are really scary. But for this narrow use of removing the drudgery of trying to comb through data to help people find patterns, it's really cool. And so these scientists were out in this boat, and one of them emails me and he says, we were testing this new tool that does it automatically, and there are 3 whales in front of them, and one of them was yours. And oh, well, it's not mine, you know, maybe the whale hates me and would hate to hear that. But like, they had a GPS transmitter with them with a little suction pad. And so they plonked that onto the whale. And so I spent January and February watching this whale that had jumped onto me in 2015 poodle around the coast of Mexico and California. And I thought, this is really quite weird. And like, they took a bit of its skin fell off, so they're doing a DNA sample now, so we'll know what sex the whale is and what its family relationships are. And it shows you how, sort of what you're talking about, Miranda, with how you can go back to previous collections and with new technologies in the same way that Darwin would not have been able to extract information from those like crustaceans and mollusks that you were looking at, that you can. We can go back into previous collections and previous experiences and link them into a wider context, and then the story develops. And so this is the book that I wrote. This is it in lots of different human languages. It's called How to Speak Whale, and it's about how new technologies are helping us to find patterns in the communications of other animal communications. Sorry, patterns in other languages, other animal communications. I can't speak myself at this point for some reason. Anyway, I'm tongue-tied. But despite that, maybe an AI would help me next time. And it's about how we're entering this very strange period where a lot of the things that we assumed were uniquely human, we're discovering are not uniquely human. And one of them, potentially, is language-like communication in other species. And what's really peculiar about this is the thing that's helping us to see this and explore it is making machines. Machines that help us to step outside of our human limitations. Those limitations are both physical, where we can go, what we can perceive, how much our brains can store and can compare, but they're also in terms of our psychology. We have evolved to understand patterns in human language. Those are the only patterns in language that we're very good at seeing. That makes it quite hard for us to perceive patterns in the communication systems of non-human animals. But we have made tools that find patterns in our languages that now biologists are using to try and find patterns and translate non-human communication systems. So as you've seen before, the sea is like full of fish and other animals, but it's not full of people because we evolved on land and we can't breathe in the sea. So exploring the ocean has always been a story about technology. Here's one in action. This is a drone dropping a video camera that also records movement and acceleration and speed and temperature and sound onto a blue whale. So you can see once it's recovered, you can see life from the perspective of the biggest animal that's ever lived. And I was on a team that recorded the heartbeat of a blue whale off Monterey Bay in California using 2 probes placed on different parts of its skin, measuring the time that the electrical pulse went between them, so it could infer from that what the heartbeat of a blue whale was. And they discovered that it varied from between 2 beats a minute to something like 30, which is enormous considering that our hearts vary from something like 40 or 50 to about 190. So that's one thing. You can't take the pulse of a blue whale very easily, but that machine can. This is a satellite map. The orange movements are ships, and the blue one is a whale. And this is a blue whale again. And with a satellite tag on it, you can see how it attempts to navigate and responds to shipping. That's something that we could not perceive without help from these machines. it cues us into important things into the lives of other animals. And for instance, in here, disturbance, like it's a big mystery. Why do whales get hit by ships? Why don't they just get out of the way? Well, some whales seem to be better at avoiding ships than others. And maybe the clues are that, you know, if you're a bowhead whale, you've lived for 200 years. That could take you from the age of sail through steam into diesel engines and then into nuclear. The ship velocities have changed so fast in one whale's lifetime that nothing could evolve to understand what's going on. If you go outside and you hear like a fighter aircraft and you look up in the sky, often you'll look in the totally wrong direction because it's traveling so fast you can't actually gauge with your ears where it is. And some scientists think that many of the whales that get hit by boats simply cannot understand where the sound is coming from, but they can hear generally where it's coming from and respond. So we can learn about things that are important to other animals and help protect them. I went to Hawaii to meet these guys. They're called Jupiter, and they designed sea robots that sail across open by themselves. This one's got a solar panel on the top, and it's got a wave-catching device underneath, and it navigates itself across literally whole oceans. So this one sailed by itself from Hawaii to Mexico. And on the way, it automatically avoided any boats with a GPS positioning system so it didn't get run over. They found it carried a camera on the top, which captured seabirds perching on it, and occasionally fishermen exposing themselves to it, which is unexpected for the scientists. And underneath it were dangling hydrophone arrays, and it can measure things like ocean acidification. You can have DNA sampling. You can have all sorts of different payloads. It's a bit like thinking about sort of space systems and what payloads you put onto your satellite or your asteroid probe. And this one listened across these seas, and it picked up the sounds of whales singing in places where whales were not thought to go or sing. And it using AI tools that comb through those recordings and can automatically tell you which species they are, they can help to present maps of where animals live, where people can't go. Because if you try and go out to sea and you're a biologist, you need a ship, you need a captain who's not drunk, you need good weather, you need to not get seasick, you need the kit to not all be rusty and run out of batteries, you need loads of funding. It's really hard if it's stormy, whereas these things can just go day after day, recording and recording and recording. But the problem with recording all the time is that these tools are giving us infinite recordings or near infinite recordings, and our brains and lives are not near infinite. So we're having this glut of biological information, but we're really struggling with how do we process it all. Oh, sorry, there's a video. Yeah, you wouldn't want to be sat on that. So this is underneath. You can see it's dangling this long rope with a hydrophone at the bottom. So, and then do you see that sort of little weird structure? That's the wave glider that captures the energy of waves. So it doesn't require any power. It powers itself. And then this is another new cool tool. This is not the new Super Mario. This is from MIT, their soft robotics laboratory, and that is a remote-controlled fish with loads of cameras and stuff inside it. And the idea here is that if you want to understand what animals in the sea do, driving a massive boat up to them and a monkey with loads of breathing devices jumping into the sea next to them, pointing stuff at them, might not capture. Like the monkey being us, sorry, like a land ape, won't necessarily reveal their intimate behaviors. So perhaps we can disguise our recording devices to move like they do if they use sonar to bounce back like the sound waves would bounce back and to infiltrate them. And so, yeah, this is one that's being developed for use with the sperm whale population off Dominica. Currently, as we speak, the biggest ever animal behavior recording expedition in history is taking place to record the conversations of the resident sperm whales of Dominica. And they're using drones, like the ones you've seen before, to drop hydrophones, like underwater record audio recording devices with multiple hydrophones. So if there's lots of different whales talking, they can record all the different ones and use tools to separate them out and know who's talking. They're doing that over a big area of the sea, and they're also piloting these soft robotic fish through them, and they've got like static arrays as well. And they've convened over like 35 scientists from some of the leading institutions in the world to try and decode and by 2026, 27, understand the communications of the sperm whales there. And their progress is exciting, and I can't tell you any more than that. But that's called Project SETI, and you can be involved in that too. I go in way more detail about how it all works in the book, but this is basically how it's working. There's a sperm whale with a tag on it. There's a dangling hydrophone array. There's a little mobile robot. So that's all about how you get the information out of the sea. Then you upload it into a huge storage system. Cheryl, who's the curator of animal and environmental sound and wildlife sound at the British Library, and I met up last week with some Scottish scientists, bringing the recordings of the voices of our rare orca from Scotland, including these two that are from the last community of an extremely rare community of orca that's dying out, the only recordings of their voices, and bringing them into the British Library. Where does all this information live? I think as we're in the British Library, it's a really interesting conversation to have. Like, I was talking to the curator of mammals at the Natural History Museum. Yeah, right? Yeah. He's such a cool guy. He's incredibly tall and claims the only reason they hired him was he was the only person tall enough to reach the specimens on the top shelf. But like, when you're getting all of this information, you know, we know that I used to work at the BBC, the Natural History Unit. We would get all of these recordings of animal behavior, and we'd put them in hard drives and put them on shelves. And I'd speak to marine biologists who studied bait ball dynamics. And if we shot like 1,000 bait balls to show one on TV, those other 999 bait balls are pretty useful scientific data. In the same way that early collections of naturalists were private, they're really useful things to have in the public domain. And so as big science institutions gather the conversations, the movements of these animals, where will they go? And how will people like you interact with them and explore them? How will scientists find things in them? No one has a plan for this yet, because it's all happened so fast. This is what's called an embedded cloud. This is the top 10,000 spoken words in English, mapped out according to their relationships to one another, how closely and often they're used versus one another. This is in 3D for us, but the computer models use thousands, well, infinite, as many dimensions as they want. And generally, there are like 10,000 dimensional model for 10,000 words. So each word versus every other word in English. And what scientists who've studied, I'll go back a step. This was developed by Facebook and Google. These companies wanted to find patterns in human language that would be useful for predicting what we do, what we like, and what could be sold to us. What they discovered was that if you map out all the words in a language, you can make one of these clouds, and you can kind of do geometry on them. You can sort of deduct boy from, this is very kind of crude description, but you can deduct boy from king, and it will give you prince, and girl from queen. You say, what is the younger version of that, or the boy relation of that? And you'll come to the same conclusion. And what's really interesting about this for translating is they found that the geometrical relationships between human languages map from English to Urdu to Swahili to Swedish. So if you find the hidden geometrical patterns in a language, computers can translate between human languages without a bilingual dictionary, without even being told that they're dealing with a language. Because all they do is they go through the data, they arrange it based on its the units of the data's relationships to one another, and then they match patterns from one data set to another. And that is really exciting. That's why Project SETI is happening, and many other animal translation projects are just kicking off at the moment, because we have no way in to what other animals might be saying. So And we can't go and ask a macaque to translate for us. Until very recently, to try and understand what other animals are saying, we've had to try and teach them English. And if they're not really good, we said they're probably not good at language. But watching animal lives in the wild, it's also very hard. You can't just sit with a pod of dolphins for 70 years. You can't understand, you can't hear them very clearly, you can't even find them the next day. But if you get these big machine-enabled data sets, and then you use these machine tools developed for human animals to find patterns in them, maybe you can find the patterns of another language. And if the patterns match a bit to the patterns of our language, we can start to populate the galaxies of different forms of animal communication and see how we fit into them. I know this room is insanely hot, and you're probably quite sleepy, but are you still there?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. Okay. So I go into way more detail into the book about how this works, but that's it, yeah, and that's a humpback whale. And I'll just end by sort of talking about why it's important. The reason these scientists are trying to do this is because in the 1970s, we were industrially slaughtering whales of all species. We killed over 3 million whales, the biggest removal of biomass in history. We now know that we were removing whole cultures because different whales communicate in different ways in different places, and they have totally distinct behaviors passed down within their cultures. They have singing cultures that evolve in different species and change every year, with some whales and the humpbacks in Australia seem to generate like earworms, songs that are particularly catchy, and they spread through all the oceans to other whales. There are orcas in the Pacific Northwest that started wearing salmon as hats. One female just started, the others in her group started doing it. They did it for 2 months, then they stopped, no one knew why. Like dolphins get high and pass pufferfish around. If you're a conscious animal, maybe it's quite an indication, if you want to get out of your head occasionally, how complex that other species is. Other dolphins, when they were doing tests on them in captivity, they held a mirror up. Diana Rees and her team held a mirror up to see what the dolphin would do. In animal conscious experiments, if you put a mark on an animal that it can only see in a mirror, and it looks in the mirror and it sees the mark on itself and it gestures towards the mark, that indicates it knows it's looking at itself, not just another animal. The dolphins not only looked at the marks, they started opening their mouths, sticking out their tongues, doing backflips and having sex in front of the mirrors. Like, they are really interesting, complex animals. And there's over 90 species of cetaceans. And the more we look at them, the more complex and nuanced and weird their behaviors are. And so we have now this extraordinary... Oh, sorry, I'll go back to the story. So we're industrially slaughtering them, and we stopped. And we didn't stop because we realized how many we were killing. We stopped because we discovered that they sang. We discovered that humpback whales like this sang. Roger Payne and his wife Katie Payne and a guy called Scott McVeigh were given recordings from a Navy engineer called Frank Watlington of whale songs. They were beautiful. They analyzed them. They realized that they essentially broke down musically. They had verse, chorus, verse structures repeated, small units inside it that were repeated in larger arrangements like human music. They utilized rhyme, they utilized rhythm, and they changed and evolved, as I mentioned before. But more important than that, which was the front page of Science magazine, the journal, they sounded really beautiful. And when they released it as an album in National Geographic magazine, which had a huge circulation of like 8 million or something, it was the biggest single pressing of any album ever, and they went viral, and loads of people listened to them, and Bob Dylan played them, and Julie Collins included them on her music, and they were on telly, and Carl Sagan put them on the golden discs on the Voyager space probe and blasted them into space. And people just got really into whales, and we thought, well, if they sing, maybe we should care a bit more about them. And we did, and the Save the Whales movement was born, which was the first big environmental success story that we have. Greenpeace budded out of that. And we stopped hunting whales industrially, and now humpback whales are free to return to their old waters and breach onto unsuspecting kayakers like me, and go into like Falmouth Harbour. We've had humpbacks coming back into our waters much more recently. So the reason that these scientists want to understand what these animals might be saying is not because it's cool, and it is really cool. It's because to respect other things and to inconvenience ourselves on their behalf, we seem to need to see things that we do in them. We seem to empathize with them. And we need to see them as individuals. We need to think of them as talking and communicating and having lives that we can relate to. And if you can understand what someone else is saying, that's the way to understand their lives and to care about them. And that's why they're doing it. And that's why I wrote a book about it. This is a Robert Burns quote, which I will not try and pronounce. I'm going to say it in English, London English. "Oh, what some power the giftie give us to see ourselves as others see us. It would from many a blunder free us and foolish notion." And I think one of the most foolish notions we have is that we're different from the rest of life on Earth. And I think seeing ourselves through the eyes of a whale could help us get there. Oh, and that's a Natural History Museum. This is one of the best ones. This is, no offense.
That's in
Paris, yeah. I won't.
Yeah,
It's
good.
Yeah, it's good. I'd say second best. Second best. But it's a big room of skeletons, and it is so incredible. But imagine if you could go and not only see the skeletons, but you could also put on a VR headset and be a whale. You could experience the swarm dynamics of a bait ball. You could go through time and map through the movements and migrations of lots of different individuals and their interrelations and relationships. Not just bodies, but what bodies do. So that's it.
Thank you, Tom. That's amazing. Each of you has the most fascinating life. We could give the whole evening to each of you individually. But anyway, I hope that you, like me, are burning with a whole load of questions. I'm just going to open it up to the floor now. Anybody got any questions that they are absolutely desperate to ask? Really? Yes, yes. Can you just wait for the microphone to come to you? There's a lady in green here. It's coming from the other side. There we go.
Thank you. I wanted to ask this on Friday when I came to your gorgeous musical gig. What are whales singing with? Do they have a larynx? Are they producing it through their head cavities? What are they singing with?
Great question. There are the cetaceans, which is the whales, dolphins, and porpoises, which is an infraorder, which is a big group. There's 90 species, and they're split into the toothed and the baleen whales. If you see like a beluga or a sperm whale or a bottlenose dolphin, it's got a big lumpy thing on the front of its head called the melon. That's a sound production and modification organ. And the other thing you'll notice is they just have one nostril. Whereas the blue whales and humpback whales, if you look on the top of their heads, they have two nostrils next to each other. And the blue whales are baleen whales. So the toothed whales, their nostrils take different paths through the front of that lumpy melon thing, which is essentially like our nose with our bottom lip curled round to cover it up and then sort of evolved in an incredibly complicated way. But it's basically a big, fleshy nose with nostrils taking different routes, and only one of those nostrils comes out. The other pathway is quite circuitous, and it's through moving air within one of those nostrils, and then over in the sperm whales, these they look like two coconuts put together, and they clap together as the sound comes out, and that big clap ricochets back through all of the melon, which manipulates the sound, onto the conical. If you look at the skeleton, you'll see the front of the skull is like that. It's like a big satellite dish, and that beams that sound out. That is used for echolocating, so they listen back to the echoes that come back. But obviously, they can also manipulate sounds and use them for communication too. So they make clicks in their nostrils, but they can also make kind of like gurgles and kind of like farty noises and all sorts of other stuff. But then you've got the baleen whales, and they use their larynxes. And it's not the same. But the thing that all whales have in common is they don't breathe air out to talk. You don't see bubbles coming off them underwater. They won't open and close their mouth. It's all inside, which is really irritating if you're trying to understand who's talking and you're in the sea and sound travels so much faster and it's coming at you from all directions.
That's a brilliant explanation of how you produce sound as a cetacean. Yes, this lady in the front, please. Just hang on, wait for the microphone and we'll get to you.
Hi. I've been drawing in that Paris museum, but I've also been drawing in the basement of the Natural History Museum, which is like the warehouse where Richard Sabin has his collection. It's amazing. But I was drawing a blue whale ear bone, I think. Can you just tell me a bit more about how they hear? Because I know they hear through vibrations in their skeleton, but also the ear is... I've just literally been making a sculpture of it today.
Wow.
So I think it's called an otolith. Is that right? Yeah, I mean, you might be able to give me some backup on this one.
Go ahead.
Well, they hear through their jaw primarily. They don't have pinna, external ears, like we do. But so the sound is received and it travels up through their jawbone through fatty-filled channels that go up into their inside parts of their ears. What I don't know is how they differentiate in height-wise, because our pinna really help us, and directionally, because like the reason we have these like funny lumpy things, like, is to have secondary bouncing into our ears of sound. So if it goes directly in faster from that side than this side, we know where it's coming from. But also the angle of direction gives different refraction patterns into our heads. But yeah, basically up through their jaws, like a radio antenna.
Excellent.
I mean, I'm not a biologist, so I could be totally wrong, but I have...
I don't think you are.
Okay.
You're all right. Excellent. Anybody got any questions for Miranda or David? I've forgotten we've got viewers online.
We've got online questions, yes.
Yeah.
So this is one for everyone, I guess, and it's about your kind of journey to how you got where you are, and they're asking what work experience would you recommend? What did you study at university? Things like that. Like, how did you get into this, and how did you get where you are?
Let's start with David. How did you get? Was there a turning point when you were a child where you jumped into the sea and realised you wanted to study sharks?
No,
No.
not that direct. No, so like many people, I was inspired by nature documentaries on a Sunday evening. You know, sitting down to watch Big Cat Diary, Simon King, and all those stories, and the stories that they're telling about individual animals, you connect with them. That really inspired me. But I think along a similar time, my dad had a career change. He went from being a mortgage advisor to managing a recreational fishery in an angling club in the southeast of the country in Kent. And I became a bailiff on those lakes, and I would walk around and I would pick up rubbish. I would also talk to the fishermen. I would help restock the ponds and the lakes and the rivers, help manage them. And I really just built this kind of on-the-job learning and appreciation for UK rivers, and particularly UK species. And I just decided that that's what I was doing at university. At that point, I hadn't decided whether I wanted to do zoology or marine biology. I ended up doing marine biology, to answer the question. Marine and freshwater biology at undergraduate, and then marine biology at master's level. And then there was a job that was available at the Zoological Society of London. I remember at the time, the advert was they really wanted someone with a knowledge of Thames estuary and southeast the UK fish. And I was like, perfect, I've been harassing fish down here for ages. I'll go and sign up for that one. And the rest is history. And after that, I've carved a path through, and now I work on some of the biggest fish. But I said to Tom backstage earlier, the first job I got at ZSL was every other day I'd go into the Thames estuary, swallow half of it and try and count eels. And I did that for quite a while. But you love it nonetheless.
And Miranda, if somebody wanted to try and follow in your footsteps and do a job that's similar to you, where on earth do you start with getting experience doing that if you've not had any before?
There wasn't work experience behind the scenes at the museum when I started, so and I came from a biomedical background, in fact, before joining the museum, and I was doing research into rheumatoid arthritis. You know, I was doing sequencing and so forth in the very, very early days. So, but I always had an interest in nature, natural history, and photographing nature, which I still do today. But in terms of my job at the museum, I would advise anyone that we have a work experience program now, so there's a web page for that and how you register. We have volunteer scheme as well for those that can volunteer. There's a lot more citizen science to get people engaged. We've got an urban nature project. We've got many other projects that are going on to inspire people. you know, to understand, and we're a lot more open and accessible for people to understand the variety of marine biological jobs, data management, you know, it's a bigger thing now, data curators, environmental data. So there's lots of different jobs now people can have behind the scenes of the museum. And for me, when I first started, I was just looking, I really wanted a job in science. Visited museums like most people do on school trips and things. Never really thought that I'd be working behind the scenes and how it operated, as I say. You know, there were no volunteer schemes, but I was reading, New Scientist, looking through for the scientific jobs, essentially. And then there was an interesting one that wanted an assistant curator of marine invertebrates. I didn't study a zoology degree. I had an applied biology degree, and subsequently, while I was working, and got my master's and so forth. But, you know, the museum itself, so I applied for the job. There were 2 jobs, one for a new molecular sequencing lab. I didn't do that one. That might have been more akin to, you know, my background that I'd come from. But I went for this new, interesting job because, you know, I was young and like, oh gosh, what is this all about? But once I got there as a junior grade, it was the best university ever because you had the access to all these international scientists. You open cupboard doors and there's all these deep sea creatures, you know, some of them still unidentified, that amaze me. I don't know what classification they are in. And obviously, you know, new technology will be able to help with that in future and so forth. But yeah, so that's where I learnt my trade and craft because, you know, there was literally in the early days a scientist in amphipods, the chap called Roger Lincoln, that had his microscope there, I had mine there, and we'd go in and out of the collection. He'd show me how to dissect, what features to look at, how to use the guides to tell you what family and species that they're in. But, you know, the museum's a lot more accessible now that there are many, many opportunities for people to get involved in, to become scientists, essentially.
Fantastic. Do we have any more online? If not, I've got...
This one's probably quite hard, but maybe we know for Tom. Do the panelists have a favourite sea creature and why?
No. What's your favourite fish, Tom?
My favourite fish?
Sorry, sea creature.
Yeah, because I was
a
seal.
Yeah?
Yeah, I just like seals. They're like dogs in the sea.
Yeah, they're playful as well, aren't
playful,
they?
yeah. I mean, that's
Very
probably what I'd be.
inquisitive.
I'd probably have aspirations to be an orca, but probably am more of a seal. Yeah.
What would you be?
Well, I do have a favourite fish and another. So pufferfish, because you mentioned that when you were talking pufferfish. But that aside, Bathynomus giganticus. So it's literally a giant woodlouse in the ocean, a scavenger, and it's, you know, quite big. Can be your longest ruler, like 32 centimetres. Really amazing, you know, long antennae, about 3/4 of its body, and huge eyes. And because it lives so deep in the dark ocean, less light, so you've got bigger features to, you know, move around, you know, antennae for censoring and eyes, you know, less light. So yeah, Google that one.
David?
It's a tough choice, but I think I've got a soft spot for sea snakes, I have to say.
Why?
Well,
Anybody else got soft spots for sea snakes?
Have you ever dived with one?
Yes!
They are incredible. They do not care you're there, and they will behave completely the same whether you're there or whether you're not. And I guess I have this kind of affection towards them because we used to take our open water divers down to the diving platform to help them learn their skills. And you just see these sea snakes coming over, and they would just swim all through your regulators. And you just see these students on their first dive and their mask is going like this and they're panicking. And the sea snakes, they're amazing. And then the students would get up on the surface, they'd talk about, you know, their encounter with sea snakes. I'm never going near them again. And then we'd be having dinner in the evening and the sea snakes would be coming up on land to come and lay their eggs. So they'd be kind of walking. They'd be slithering through the canteen to lay their eggs. And they just couldn't get away from them. So ever since then, I find them fascinating. They're the best animal.
So I
haven't got a project on them yet. I want one, just for that reason, to indulge myself. But they're incredible, banded sea crates.
But aren't they some of the most venomous?
They are, but they're rear fang. Just don't put your tiny little...
Wow.
No soft spots?
No.
See, I would go for a tom pot blenny any day. The most colourful, charismatic British fish with little sort of antlers, little bushy antlers, and the bushier the antlers, the more attractive the males are to the females. And and they're just colourful and cool. And each tom pot blenny's got individual facial markings, so you can actually name them. Like you were talking about naming, your house martin or your blue tit or whatever. You can identify Byron and Benny and Bert the blenny, and that just
Benny the blenny.
Yes, there's a book about it. You can Google that one as well. Amazing. Right, any more questions? Yes, one more in the audience. Let's finish off with that. This is going to be the last one. Can we just wait for the microphone? Are you okay? All right.
What are the biggest risks to life under the sea? Let's talk about seafloor mining, things like this, obviously expansion and shipping, and what are the biggest risks to the whole ecosystem under the sea?
Where do we start? One each, maybe.
I think the overarching concern is we're getting into the dangerous tipping points of climate change. I think while plastic pollution and things like that are issues, and they do evoke a lot of public interest and response, I think that's because that is a tangible thing that people feel they can actually physically see and physically impact. Whereas the big climate change, ocean acidification, we're talking about things like fish growing otoliths in the, any calcium-based structure, whether it's a coral skeleton, whether it's a pteropod shell, whether it's a fish bone, they're going to be far harder to form, and the integrity of that structure is going to be quite degraded if ocean acidification continues on the pathway we're going. We're going to get massive redistribution of species. How do we manage that? How do we manage it if key fish stocks go away from the coasts and the communities that depend upon them? I think, the big driver of climate change is the biggest one, but it's also the hardest one for us to tackle.
I mean, I would definitely agree with that, because that affects, many animals, as you say. You cited them all, and so that is the biggest risk. I couldn't explain it any better. That is definitely the biggest risk. And yeah, I mean, we do studies at the museum in terms of plastics as well. And some of the animals that we don't, I mentioned amphipods, tiny shrimpy things, but even they are getting microplastics into their system. So if you think about, an animal that's less than a millimetre, and where we can talk about crabs and the bigger animals, but if it's affecting those really tiny animals, there are massive issues around that. But ocean acidification, affects wider diversity of animals and environments. Yeah.
I think, just tied into that, ignorance and indifference. We didn't know about ocean acidification if we didn't study it, and we know hardly anything about the oceans in general. It's so hard to, not hardly anything, but compared to our studies on land of how system flows, ecosystem dynamics, diversity of organisms, trophic levels, we don't know what we're interfering with, and many people don't care about it. And if you have human drivers like climate change, we won't arrest those drivers unless we know what they're doing and people care about those outcomes. So I think that's the twin thing with it. What do you think?
Well, obviously, I agree with you with the climate change, but I was also reading Helen Scales' book about the deep, which is, if you haven't read it, it's amazing. Yeah. So Helen Scales, the deep, so it's this discovery and this wonderful sort of journey through all these incredible animals and habitats of the deep sea. And then the final chapter is all about what we're doing to destroy all of this before we found out enough about it, which is all about deep sea mining, which is what you mentioned as well. Yeah. So that's something that we can do something about it, because it's just beginning to happen now. And, climate change is already happening. It's we hear that it's beyond the part, the tipping point. Deep sea mining is only just beginning right now. So we hopefully have the power, the voice to try and stop that or slow it down. So that's, I feel, something we can possibly do something about. It's just one of the many threats out there.
Can I ask you a question? Because you've been in so many bits of the UK seas.
Yeah.
And like, it's a bit of a downer to end on what we've
Yeah,
got.
yeah, let's end on a positive note, shall we?
No, it's really important.
Yeah.
But what would be your top 3 things, joyous sea experiences that anyone who's from the UK can do?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I've spent my last 20, 30 years diving and filming around the UK waters. I would totally echo what you said about seals. I think they're the most incredible creatures. You don't have to be a scuba diver to get in the water with them. You can just go and snorkel with them, whether it's in St Ives Bay, whether it's in the Isles of Scilly, whether it's up in the Farne Islands. They're the most inquisitive creatures. These are social, air-breathing mammals who are intent on communicating with you in some way, and they will go up to you as a diver and pull your fins and pull your mask off, and they are trying to interact with us. And one day maybe we can find out what they're trying to say. We can try and communicate with them, but that's probably my top thing. I've been just back from a trip around the UK, watching a lot of seabirds, and the seabird colonies are just astonishing. The ganna trees that we have, the islands, the solitary islands that we have with puffins on them are just incredible. These beautiful unspoilt places where a lot of the times you can't set foot on land, and if you can, the birds are very protected. A great positive story is islands like Scoma in Pembrokeshire in southwest Wales have got the largest number of puffins they have ever had since, I think, the 1900s, nesting this year. You know, that is really amazing. So when there's a lot of doom and gloom, it's really just empowering, I think, to hear figures like that. And then you can actually walk on the island. You can walk right up to a puffin. It will look right at you and then fly off. And that's a wonderful thing. I'm trying to think of my number 3 now.
Invertebrate.
Invertebrate. Oh, yeah. Okay. Common cuttlefish then. Just incredible creatures. Again, if you're not a diver, it might be difficult to get an encounter with a cuttlefish. But if you are ever in the water, if you're in the shallows in a bay, and you can go under a pier and even if just duck dive down. If you see a cuttlefish, they are like alien creatures. They really are. They're the weirdest, most wonderful things. They have these, I mentioned it at the beginning, these colour-changing cells in their skin. And when the males are mating with the females, they perform these beautiful balletic dances, and these mesmerising, rippling displays to sort of woo the females in. Absolutely beautiful creatures. So there's a lot of wonderful creatures in the ocean, and a lot of amazing wildlife around the UK as well. So
you don't have to go that far. If you do want to see seals, you can see them in the Thames estuary.
You've got ginger seals,
grey seals, and common seals.
Yeah, and the
go
slightly
to the Isle of
irony,
Sheppey, or out the back of
well,
Billingsgate Fish
yeah.
Market. There's a grey seal often hanging around there.
Amazing. Well, that brings us to the end of our evening. We've overrun just a little bit, but only a few minutes. So it just leaves me to say a massive thank you to our panel for their insight and depth of knowledge and sharing these amazing experiences and just getting a little sort of insight into your lives. Absolutely amazing. Thank you, David. Thank you, Miranda. Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much to the audience here and also those online who've joined us. Thank you very much. Thank you for sending questions in as well. If you want to stay on, the bar is open until 9:30, so a few of us are going to be hanging around. So if there are any questions that you've got or you just want to have a quick chat with us, if you want to take a memento home, Tom's book and my book are on sale. I'm sure we'll come and sign them down in the bar as well. So in the meantime, have a safe journey home. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you. Thank you, panel.